Hi, I'm Andy Lazur. I'm a water quality specialist with University of Maryland Extension, and I am going to present top contaminants in well water. So when we think about drinking water contamination in general, whether it be from a public source or a private well, you have to realize that there is so many things that we do on a day-to-day basis that can and do contaminate our groundwater and our surface water. Industry, fertilizers, from agriculture, from homes, automobiles, landfills, livestock, our recreation, all of these things, whether they be organics or pesticides, industrial compounds, whatever the case may be, can get into surface water and also our groundwater. And then if we're on a private well, then potentially we are taking up some of these contaminants. And contamination on the well will vary depending upon the location of the well and the type of geology and soils that are there, and also what sort of activities are nearby. This is an example of a fractured rock geology where the water is actually stored inside these fractures, spaces within the rocks over time due to pressure and temperature changes. You get these fractures in the geology. And this is the water that is stored rather than, say, a coastal plain aquifer where you have layers of different types of not only sediments, but also aquifers. These particular fractured rock geology and wells that are tapped into there, as you can see, this particular well is tapped into this fracture right here because it's an open bore and it's getting water from this fracture, it's getting rock from this fracture. And some of these other fractures are connected. And obviously what you're also seeing is that these fractures are connected to the shallow groundwater. And so the shallow groundwater is so much more susceptible to the contamination of land use activities, whatever that may be. So again, fractured rock wells have a tendency to be at greater risk due to surface contamination. And another thing about groundwater is that it moves, and it moves dependent upon the type of geology, certainly, and you have to take that into consideration when you are locating homes with septic systems and wells. EPA has established drinking water standards for public water, and that includes what's called these maximum contaminant levels. And these are for pollutants or contaminants that can actually cause human health issues. And then they have secondary standards. These are pollutants that cause aesthetic issues, problems with taste and stainage, things like that. Involved within those drinking water regulations, so all public water goes through pretty extensive testing, roughly for about 95 contaminants. And these contaminants could include disinfectants, chlorine, for example, the byproducts of using chlorine as a means of killing bacteria in public water, inorganic chemicals, iron, things like that, microorganisms, organic chemicals. These could be pesticides, herbicides, those types of things, and then also radionuclides. When we make recommendations for testing private wells, which are not regulated by EPA, and therefore it's up to the owner of the well to test and treat that water quality. And this is what we recommend to test for. We annually test for coliform bacteria, E. coli, and nitrates. These are primarily indicator of some sort of connection, contamination, if you will, from animal waste, whether that be wildlife, pets, livestock, or human waste through septic systems. And obviously these are very important for families with pregnant women and infants because they're more susceptible to contaminants. Also, we suggest that you test on a regular basis, say every 3 years, or if you have never tested, to test for this whole suite, which also includes chloride, pH, lead, copper, total dissolved solids, sulfates, and iron, for example, and then other contaminants based on local conditions. So there are naturally occurring contaminants such as arsenic or radon, manganese, things like that that it's good to test for. And then once you have those testing results, you'll know what sort of treatment is necessary. Again, here's in Maryland, an example where we have naturally occurring arsenic areas, and that's coming from the geology. You can see here on the eastern shore, it extends into central Maryland. There's also some out west. We have radon and radium areas, again, coming from the natural geology. And then, of course, we also have brackish water intrusion, some in both the Chesapeake and the coastal bays. We've all probably heard about lead toxicity. The Flint, Michigan lead crisis is most noteworthy within the last 5 years or so. And lead is not coming from the groundwater, but it's actually leaching from our plumbing, dependent upon the types of fixtures and supply pipes that we have. So historically, lead pipe was used, and also lead was in the solder that's used in say copper pipe fittings and even in our fixtures. 1984, there was legislation that reduced the amount of lead in fixtures, but again, older homes may still have this. And if you have corrosive water, and you might know that by the pictures, two pictures in the middle and the bottom, where you see this pitting of material, you see this blue stain. That's not showing a direct indication of lead. What that's showing is that you have corrosive water, and if you have lead in your plumbing fixtures, then that lead and or copper could be leaching from that and getting into your drinking water. So with lead, obviously there's no safe level of exposure, and children and pregnant women are particularly vulnerable. And interestingly enough, in a survey from Pennsylvania, Virginia, and North Carolina, they found 1 out of 7 private wells had elevated lead in their water. So another contaminant, of course, is nitrates. I mentioned this as one of the indicators of some contamination from animal waste, whether that be, again, livestock, wildlife, or connections to septic systems. And again, there is a health issue here, particularly with infants, where you get what's called blue baby syndrome, shortness of breath. And again, these are coming from septic tanks or some sort of fertilizer or animal manure. Total coliform bacteria is, again, this is a group of bacteria. Most of them are generally not harmful to human health, but again, it indicates this possible contamination. And obviously the target is 0, and it can create some gastrointestinal upset. And it's coming, again, naturally from animal and human waste. Insects, for example, can elevate the total coliform bacteria in a well if the well cap is not sealed correctly. Flooding issues, things like that. pH we're familiar with. Again, that's a measure of the acidity, if you will. pH lower than 7 is acidic. Above pH 7 is alkaline. Again, it's not generally a health concern, but low pH does create some aesthetic issues. Taste also can aid in the corrosion of pipes as well as appliances, things like that. Total dissolved solids is basically just an indicator of various dissolved impurities. It's not a health risk, but if you have a high total dissolved solid, it could create some gastrointestinal distress with some individuals. Might leave the water a little murky and leave spots on your dishes, things like that. The sources, again, is coming from either a leaking septic system or, again, you're having some runoff issues from various land uses. Iron can be common in wells. Again, this is a naturally occurring mineral. Most of the iron in groundwater is in a soluble form. Where it gets oxidized, it basically forms rust. And this is a nuisance or aesthetic issue. It's not necessarily a health issue, but it does create staining, for example, or sediment buildup. This sediment buildup can actually lead to clogging in your plumbing and appliances. And then also associated with iron could be iron bacteria, which is this brownish kind of slime growth that can really clog some of the infrastructure of a well, pipes, and filters. Chloride, we're familiar with when we talk about, say, salt water, for example, or brackish water. And again, this is naturally occurring, or it's coming from road salts. We're seeing a very significant issue with increasing chlorides impacting both streams, but also groundwater, impacting wells, causing the corrosion, as I mentioned, with the flint and other types of issues with lead and copper leaching. If you have a high level of chloride, it can actually create some digestive issues. Road salt, again, is increasingly an issue, and it's actually accumulating. Concentrations are accumulating in the groundwater. A lot of effort has been to try to reduce that, but we're still seeing a lot of salt use to de-ice roads, etc. And sulfates, some of you may be familiar with hydrogen sulfide, a little different, but again, it's a sulfur-containing compound, and it has that kind of rotten egg taste. But sulfates are generally, it's a natural mineral that dissolves from the soil. If you have a relatively high level, it can have some, again, cause some issues with digestive disorders as well as dehydration. The important part with sulfates is the relationship between chloride and sulfates also indicates the corrosivity of your water. Regardless of the issue, there's a lot of different types of tests that you can perform if you're noticing some symptoms. For example, if you're having stain issues, whether it's orange and black, that could be iron or manganese. Certainly with hardness, if you have high hardness, you might get scaling in your appliances or on your dishes. It may take a lot of soap or extra amount of soap to get a lather. Chloride and sodium, we mentioned, and TDS can give you a kind of a salty taste. And then there's issues with organic compounds. And then there's a whole nother topic on what's called CECs, contaminants of emerging concern. These are all the different types of products that we use on a day-to-day basis, prescription drugs, sunscreens, all these types of things that, we're flushing down the toilet or the drains in our surface and groundwater. Some of these are broken down naturally in the soils, broken down in the water treatment systems, but some are not. And then there's a whole nother suite of compounds called PFAS, polyfluoroalkyl substances, that are used in firefighting foams and packaging, etc. So the good news is that there's a lot of different types of treatments out there for the types of typical contaminants that we see in well water, whether it be arsenic, the fluoride, the hydrogen sulfide, iron, manganese, lead, etc., even radon, and some of the volatile organic compounds. Some of these filters will even, work on some of the PFAS compounds as well. So again, there is a solution as far as water treatment, but you have to test your water and you have to know what you have. And if you have a combination of contaminants, then it may require a kind of a multi-stage type of filter. And then these filters are available, what's called point of use. This is, say directly on a faucet or a refrigerator. It could be under the sink. Reverse osmosis is very, very popular. So these are available. The other option would be what's called point of entry or whole house filtration, obviously a lot more expensive. So it's recommended that you get a thorough water test so that you know what you absolutely need, because you don't want to pay for something, a filter that you don't need. And then all these filters require regular maintenance. And that is so important with a filter, is that you have to maintain it per the recommendations, because filters will get clogged and can actually release an accumulated amount of a contaminant even higher than the incoming water. So you have to maintain these things. So again, a wealth of information available from your local county health department, your state water agency. And so I encourage you to take advantage of these resources. Thank you.